Hey everyone, welcome back to my C Sharp programming series. Last episode, we went over some IDEs you might be using. We talked about Microsoft, Visual Studio, kind of how they're integrating open source sorts of technologies. We talked about the types of applications you might make. And that was basically all we did last time. If you remember, we also started a project, totally empty. Today we're going to talk about the paradigm that C Sharp follows, which is object-oriented programming. And that is essentially the core philosophy behind C Sharp. And then we're going to talk about what a class is. I'm going to talk about the main function, what this args thing is in here. Basically all of this code. Then we're going to talk about main specifically, what functions are, some basic input and output functions, and also the console class. All right, so let's get right into it. C Sharp is object-oriented by nature. And what does that mean? It means that everything that you make is going to be an object, which is still kind of abstract, so I have this graphic to show you. Now you can imagine that you could have an object that is an instrument, and the idea in object-oriented programming is that you're trying to create relationships between different objects. So this program could be like an audio interface, for instance. Now we have this instrument. Well, what's an instrument? An instrument could be a piano, it could be a guitar, it could be ukulele, really anything that plays music. But in this example, there's a piano and a guitar. Now they're both instruments, and they both have some similar attributes. So this class might have a variable volume, it might have a size variable. They both might share the function play, for instance. And that kind of shows that. But even further than that, you could have specific types of guitars or pianos. So here we have an acoustic guitar, an electric guitar, and a bass guitar, all inheriting from the guitar class, which in turn inherits from the instrument class. So that kind of goes over basically what C Sharp is kind of trying to accomplish. Now, what is a class, which is this deal here? This is our class program. Well, it's a representation of an object. So like we were talking about earlier, an instrument class would have maybe a size or volume, etc., and all of the code associated with that class. What's this static void main thing that we have in our class? Now, these aren't so important right now, but we're going to be going over them soon anyway, so I may as well kind of say up front. Static basically means that there's only going to be one instance of it. So if we tried creating another variable using the class program, or another object using the class program, then if it called main, it wouldn't be a different instance of the main function, which will be clarified in a later episode, but there's that. And then this void means that there's no return type. So normally in your functions, you might be returning a value, so like an integer, for instance. But because this is void, it's not going to be returning anything, and by default, when it finishes execution, it's just going to stop or exit. All right, so we've got that. And then main. Now, string args is kind of interesting. So like I say here, it's essentially your initial arguments. So imagine that you want to call your program program.exe, but you want people to be able to call it and not have to enter your program and enter the data while they're inside of the program. You want them to just be able to send something through the command line and have your program do something. So here I have my program.exe, and we could pass like a file path, for instance. And what args will do is when you call this from the command line, it's going to automatically put this in args. And similarly, if you have more things afterwards, this will be like the first argument, the second argument, the third argument, etc. And that's what this is for. It's for storing those. So we probably won't really be using those, but it's useful to know what they are. Now, main is simply a function, and all functions have parentheses, and most functions will be taking parameters as well. These ones certainly will. All code is defined in curly braces, except for lambda functions, or lambda expressions as I called them, sometimes. But those are kind of an advanced feature, so we're not really going over that until a lot later. Alright, so it's time to start going over some functions. I think the best way to do this is just to kind of show what each of these is doing. Now, Visual Studio is really nice because of the IntelliSense that it provides, or what they call IntelliSense, which will give you a bunch of information about the function and will give you useful tips on like what you might be wanting to code next, for instance. So like here, I can say CO, and it already knows that I want to use console. I can just hit enter and quickly code that way. Now, Visual Studio specifically also has the shortcut where you can say CW double tab, and it will automatically do a console.write line. And the reason for that is that you will probably be using this function like a lot. So it's definitely a useful one to keep in mind. Here I can say console output. Alright, not sure if you saw that, but basically what happened is the program executed this instruction, it sent console output, and then it closed out because we didn't tell it to stop or program it to stop. If we want it to stop, we can use one of these three functions, and I'll kind of go over what each of them are doing. Now, this will make a lot more sense when we go through the variables episode, but say read line, it's going to essentially stop this console from closing. And this is also how you get user input to your console. So you can write some stuff in here, and then you can have a string variable that takes this value, and then your program can do something with it. Read is essentially the same thing, except it's only going to read a single character. And then you have read key. And read key is different because it's going to display the key that was pressed to the console window, but also you don't need to press enter. So in this case, I can just hit a key that'll close out. If I do a console.readLine, you can see that it does print the key that I pressed. Alright, so that goes over the basics of that. Now we're going to use console.write. And console.write is kind of like console.writeLine, except that it's not going to skip to the next line when you're entering input. So here's an example. You can see that now it's not on the next line. And this might be a way of making your input look nicer for your final program. That's mainly what I use it for, but there's definitely a lot of other uses. Now, if you want to skip more lines or you want to manually skip lines, you can also do the reverse \n, which is essentially a key code that universally says go to the next line. So we can do that. And you can see it did in fact go to the next line. All right. So that's all of those. Now we can talk a little bit about the console class. Now the console class, Microsoft has made it like totally built around the window, basically. This, for instance, is a console. And the console class is describing your application's console, or the window that it's executing in. We could do something like console.foregroundColor equal to, and check this out. So the IntelliSense from Visual Studio just automatically knows that we want a console color. So we'll do that, and we'll choose the green console color. Now let's see what kind of effect that has. All right, so it made our text green. Now we can also, depending on where we put this, have text in multiple colors. So I'll put this after. And then because we're putting an input and I want to make it look nice, I'm going to get rid of this new line. All right, so we can see enter input is white, but now the text that I'm typing is green because we set this attribute after we wrote this to the console. And then again, just to kind of show this off, I'm going to change this text to red and then the text that we're typing to green. So that's kind of cool, right? Yeah, that's all for today. Thank you for tuning in. This is Valkyrie signing out.